Have you ever thought about death, not as something to fear, but as a powerful force in your life, a key element in your personal transformation? What if death isn't the end at all, but the gateway to a new, stronger, and more authentic version of yourself? In today's video, we're diving into one of the most radical and transformative ideas in philosophy, Nietzsche's view of death and its crucial role in the rebirth of the self. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of history's most provocative philosophers, offers us a shocking perspective. Death is not an end, but a necessary part of the process of self-creation. According to Nietzsche, in order to truly become who we are meant to be, we must first undergo the death of our old selves, shedding outdated beliefs, false identities, and societal norms that limit our potential. But what does this really mean? How can we embrace death as a means of becoming stronger, more empowered, and more authentic? Stick around, because today we're going to explore how death, in Nietzsche's eyes, is the ultimate catalyst for personal growth, freedom, and self-empowerment. This video isn't just about philosophy, it's about applying these ideas to real life. By embracing death and letting go of our limitations, we can create lives that are not defined by external expectations but by our own desires, values, and will to power. If you're ready to challenge your understanding of life, death, and transformation, then you're in the right place. Make sure to stay with me until the end, where we'll talk about how you can apply Nietzsche's radical ideas to your own life. Before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that like button if you're excited to explore Nietzsche's philosophy with me today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into philosophy and personal transformation. And share this video with anyone who needs a little inspiration to break free from their limits. If you're finding this video valuable, please consider showing your support by clicking the super thanks button below. Your donation helps me keep creating content like this. Let's get started. Let's uncover how death is actually the key to unlocking a new, more powerful version of ourselves. Friedrich Nietzsche is often regarded as one of the most profound and provocative philosophers of the modern era. His ideas on morality, culture, and human existence continue to challenge and inspire individuals seeking a deeper understanding of life's complexities. One of the most compelling aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy is his unconventional view on death, a subject often feared, misunderstood, and seen as the ultimate end of life. But Nietzsche, in his characteristic manner, does not see death as a final destination, but rather as an essential step in the ongoing process of self-creation and transformation. This brings us to a crucial question: is death truly the end of existence? Or is it a vital part of the ongoing cycle of life? How can Nietzsche, a philosopher who is so deeply concerned with the affirmation of life, view death as an opportunity for rebirth rather than a mere cessation of life? According to Nietzsche, death is not the ultimate tragedy or an irreversible conclusion. Rather, it serves as a pivotal moment for individuals to transcend their old selves and enter a new phase of existence. In Nietzsche's worldview, death is intertwined with the very process of becoming. It is not a termination, but a transition. Nietzsche's philosophy revolves around the central idea of becoming who you are. It's a constant state of self-overcoming, growth, and the continual shedding of outdated values, beliefs, and identities that no longer serve the individual. For Nietzsche, life is a dynamic force, constantly in flux, and true freedom is found in the act of overcoming one's past limitations. This is where the concept of death comes into play. Death, in Nietzsche's thought, is not merely a biological fact, it is the end of something that must happen in order for something new to emerge. It's about shedding the old self, the part of the individual that is bound by societal norms, conventional morality, and outdated personal beliefs, and creating a new self that is more authentic, more true to the individual's inherent will to power. One of the most famous concepts in Nietzsche's philosophy is the Übermensch, often translated as Overman or Superman. This concept represents the ideal human who has transcended the limitations imposed by society, religion, and traditional morality. The Übermensch is an individual who does not accept the values handed down by others but instead creates their own values and lives according to their own will. However, to reach this state of being, one must undergo a kind of death, the death of their old self. Nietzsche's Übermensch is not a static, final state, but rather a constant process of self-creation. It is through the metaphor of death that Nietzsche describes this ongoing transformation. For Nietzsche, this process of dying to one's old self is not a morbid or nihilistic event, but a necessary and liberating one. It is through the death of the old, outdated self that a person can rise to something higher. This metaphorical death allows the individual to break free from the constraints of tradition, culture, and conventional morality and to embrace their own will to power. This is not simply an intellectual exercise, but a practical, existential challenge and ongoing journey that requires strength, courage, and a willingness to face the unknown. Nietzsche's concept of death, therefore, is inextricably linked to his vision of personal growth and self-affirmation. Nietzsche's relationship with death is also framed in his famous doctrine of eternal recurrence. In this idea, Nietzsche asks us to imagine living our lives over and over again, exactly as we have lived them, for eternity. The implication is profound. If we cannot embrace the idea of living our life repeatedly, then we have failed to truly live. We must accept death as part of this eternal recurrence. To Nietzsche, the acceptance of death and the acknowledgement that life will end in its natural course is essential for living authentically. It forces the individual to confront the reality of their existence and to live in such a way that they would be willing to repeat every action, every choice, every moment for eternity. This is the kind of life Nietzsche believed one should strive to live, not a life of avoidance or denial, but a life that affirms the entirety of existence, including its inevitable end. Thus, death in Nietzsche's philosophy is not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be embraced as part of the greater cycle of life. It is through the acceptance of death that we are liberated from the weight of societal expectations and the constraints of outdated moral systems. The individual who is able to face death not as a tragic end but as a necessary transition can then fully embrace the freedom that comes with creating their own values and living according to their authentic will. In understanding Nietzsche's philosophy on death, it is also important to consider his critique of traditional religious views on death and the afterlife. Nietzsche was a fierce critic of Christianity, which he believed promoted a life-denying morality that placed too much emphasis on an afterlife and too little on the vitality and meaning of the present moment. For Nietzsche, the Christian notion of an eternal life in heaven diminished the value of earthly existence. He argued that the emphasis on an afterlife led people to ignore the beauty and power of life itself. Nietzsche's concept of death, on the other hand, is grounded in the affirmation of life as it is, without the need for an external salvation or afterlife. In Nietzsche's view, death should not be a source of fear or resignation but a source of empowerment, a way for individuals to embrace the full experience of life and to live authentically, free from the constraints of dogma and tradition. One might wonder, then, how Nietzsche's ideas about death relate to the way we live our daily lives. The philosophy of Nietzsche challenges us to live in a way that is true to ourselves, to continually question the values and beliefs that we have inherited, and to create our own path. To do so, we must embrace the death of the old self, whether that be the death of past trauma, outdated beliefs, or the conformity of societal expectations, and allow ourselves to be reborn into a more authentic, empowered version of who we are. This process of self-overcoming is not easy, and it often requires going through metaphorical deaths, moments of crisis or change that challenge us to let go of what no longer serves us. But it is through these deaths that we grow, that we become stronger, and that we step into our fullest potential. Ultimately, Nietzsche's views on death offer us a radically different perspective from traditional views. Rather than seeing death as the end of life, Nietzsche invites us to see it as an integral part of life's cyclical nature, a necessary step in the process of self-creation, self-overcoming, and the continual transformation of the individual. To Nietzsche, death is not to be feared or avoided but embraced as part of the journey toward living authentically and fully. It is only through the death of the old that the new can emerge, allowing the individual to break free from the constraints of society and tradition and to live a life that is truly their own. In this light, Nietzsche's philosophy challenges us to reconsider how we view both life and death. Rather than seeing death as an end, we are called to see it as an opportunity for transformation, a way to shed the old and step into a life that is more authentic, empowered, and true to ourselves. Through this lens, death is not something to fear, but a powerful force of change that can propel us toward a life of greater meaning, freedom, and self-actualization. In Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, death is not viewed as the end of existence, but rather as an essential process in the continuous cycle of self-overcoming and self-creation. Nietzsche's understanding of death is deeply tied to his views on transformation, freedom, and personal development. Far from a mere biological event or cessation of life, death serves as a metaphorical concept that represents the death of outdated values, norms, and self-conceptions. It is through this metaphorical death that individuals can experience what Nietzsche calls rebirth, a profound reawakening to new possibilities, new values, and ultimately, a new self. To understand Nietzsche's perspective on death, it is essential to grasp his concept of self-overcoming. For Nietzsche, life is not a fixed destination but a process of constant becoming, of constantly overcoming one's former self, one's previous limitations, and the societal and cultural constraints that shape and define the individual. This process of self-overcoming requires a continuous reevaluation of the values and beliefs that we inherit from society, family, religion, and culture. Nietzsche suggests that in order to truly live authentically, we must undergo the death of those values and beliefs that no longer serve our highest potential. Death, in this sense, is not a tragic end but a necessary step in the cycle of personal growth and transformation. Nietzsche's conception of death goes beyond the conventional understanding of mortality as the ultimate end of life. For him, death represents the loss of those aspects of ourselves that limit our potential and prevent us from fully realizing our true nature. It is the death of the old self, the part of us that clings to outdated values, unquestioned traditions, and the expectations of others that makes room for the emergence of a new, more powerful self. The process of death, therefore, is a pivotal moment in the individual's journey towards self-realization and self-mastery. Nietzsche's philosophy emphasizes that individuals must take active responsibility for their own rebirth. This is not a passive process, nor is it something that can be granted or bestowed upon someone. Rebirth requires the individual to actively challenge their own assumptions, beliefs, and practices in order to create a life that is uniquely their own. It involves the courage to face the death of the old self and to embrace the unknown, the possibility of creating a new self free from the constraints of tradition, culture, and external validation. Nietzsche's ideal is the individual who is willing to confront and transcend their old limitations, to engage in a process of radical self-reinvention, and to become the master of their own fate. The death that Nietzsche speaks of is not a literal death in the physical sense, but rather a symbolic one, a death of the ego, the social identity, and the conformity to societal norms. It is a rejection of all that has been imposed upon us by culture and tradition. To truly live, Nietzsche argues, one must be willing to kill off these external influences and create a new, empowered sense of self. This is where the idea of rebirth comes in. Rebirth is not simply the restoration of the old self or the return to a previous state of being. It is a complete transformation, a reimagining of who we are, what we stand for, and how we engage with the world. Nietzsche's idea of rebirth is deeply tied to his critique of conventional morality. Traditional moral systems, particularly those rooted in Christianity and the established social order, place limits on human potential. They promote virtues like meekness, self-sacrifice, and submission to authority, values that, according to Nietzsche, undermine the individual's ability to assert their own will and create their own values. In this sense, Nietzsche sees the death of traditional morality as a necessary precondition for personal rebirth. It is through the rejection of these life-denying values that the individual can begin the process of creating their own values that are life-affirming, empowering, and reflective of the individual's true desires and instincts. This idea of death and rebirth also speaks to Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or Overman. The Übermensch is the ideal individual who has transcended the limitations of conventional morality and societal expectations. This figure has undergone a process of continuous self-overcoming and rebirth. The Übermensch is not bound by the values of the herd or the constraints of traditional morality. Instead, they create their own values and live according to their own will. Nietzsche's Übermensch is a person who has fully embraced their freedom, their individuality, and their power to shape their own life. The idea of rebirth in Nietzsche's philosophy is not limited to a single moment or event but is an ongoing process. Rebirth occurs every time we challenge and overcome our previous selves, every time we let go of outdated beliefs, and every time we create new possibilities for ourselves. Rebirth, in this sense, is not a one-time event but a continuous journey of transformation and self-empowerment. This continuous process of self-creation is what Nietzsche sees as the ultimate expression of freedom, the freedom to become who we are, to live according to our own values, and to transcend the limitations of society and tradition. To further understand this concept of rebirth, consider the example of someone who has suffered a significant personal failure or hardship. In many cases, individuals who experience failure or loss are presented with an opportunity for rebirth. They can choose to let their failure define them, or they can choose to use it as a catalyst for growth and transformation. Nietzsche would argue that the person who chooses the latter path, who uses their suffering as a means to create a new, stronger version of themselves, has embraced the concept of rebirth. In this way, death, the death of their old self, and rebirth, the emergence of a new self, are part of the same transformative process. Similarly, Nietzsche's philosophy encourages individuals to challenge the values and beliefs they have inherited from society. For example, many people in modern society are taught to value material success, social approval, and conformity. However, Nietzsche would argue that these values are life-denying because they discourage individuals from following their true desires and asserting their own will. To experience rebirth, an individual must reject these values and embrace a more authentic, self-directed path. This may involve challenging the traditional career paths, social expectations, and moral codes that society imposes, and instead creating a life that is more aligned with the individual's true essence. Rebirth, then, is not about returning to a previous state of being, but about creating something entirely new. It is a process of radical transformation that requires the individual to break free from the constraints of the past and to embrace the possibility of creating a new, empowered self. Nietzsche's vision of rebirth is one of personal freedom, self-assertion, and creative self-expression. It is about becoming who you truly are, not in relation to the expectations of society or culture, but in relation to your own desires, instincts, and will. Nietzsche's concept of death and rebirth also challenges the traditional understanding of life and death as a binary opposition. Rather than seeing life and death as opposites, Nietzsche suggests that they are intimately connected. Death, in his philosophy, is not an end, but a transition, a necessary moment in the process of self-creation and transformation. Rebirth is not the restoration of something lost, but the creation of something new, a new form of life that is more authentic, more empowered, and more true to the individual's will. Ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy invites us to embrace the idea of rebirth as an ongoing process of transformation. It encourages us to let go of the limitations of the past and to create new possibilities for ourselves. Rebirth is not about avoiding death or fearing the end of things, but about using death as a catalyst for growth, renewal, and self-empowerment. In this way, death and rebirth are not separate events, but part of the same continuous cycle of self-overcoming, a cycle that allows us to transcend our previous limitations and create a life that is truly our own. Through this process of rebirth, Nietzsche's philosophy offers a path to freedom, a freedom that is found in the act of becoming who we truly are, free from the constraints of society, tradition, and the values imposed upon us by others. In Nietzsche's philosophy, death is not merely the physical end of life, rather, it symbolizes a profound and transformative process in which an individual must overcome their old, limiting self. The death that Nietzsche speaks of is the death of the weak, unassertive parts of the self, those aspects of our identity shaped by societal norms, inherited values, and external pressures that prevent us from living authentically. For Nietzsche, the concept of self-assertion is deeply intertwined with the idea of shedding the old, outdated self, and embracing a more powerful, self-determined existence. To assert oneself in the truest sense, one must be willing to let go of the past, to confront and transcend the limitations that have been imposed upon us, and to create a new, more empowered identity. Nietzsche's view of death as a crucial part of self-assertion is rooted in his broader philosophy of life as a continuous process of self-overcoming. For Nietzsche, life is not a static state, but a dynamic, ever-evolving journey of growth and transformation. This process requires individuals to constantly question their values, beliefs, and habits, and to discard those that no longer serve their highest potential. Nietzsche sees death as a metaphorical cleansing, a means of letting go of the past and opening oneself up to new possibilities. In this way, death is not a tragedy or a finality, but an essential step in the ongoing act of self-creation. The concept of death in Nietzsche's philosophy is also closely linked to the idea of the Übermensch, Overman, or Superman. The Übermensch is the ideal individual who has transcended the limitations of conventional morality and societal expectations. The Übermensch is not a passive, reactive figure. Rather, this individual actively shapes their own destiny, creating new values and living in accordance with their own will. However, to become the Übermensch, an individual must first go through a process of self-dissolution, the death of the old self. This death is not something to be feared but something to be embraced as a necessary part of becoming a more powerful, self-assertive individual. The Übermensch must constantly die to their old selves, rejecting outdated beliefs, values, and social conventions, and continually rebirth themselves into a more authentic and empowered version of who they are. This idea of death as a necessary precursor to self-assertion can be illustrated with a concrete example. Imagine a person who has been living their life according to the expectations and norms of others. Perhaps they have pursued a career they do not enjoy, adhered to social conventions they do not believe in, or suppressed their true desires and ambitions to fit into a predefined mold. Over time, this person may begin to feel disconnected from their true self. They may experience a sense of existential dissatisfaction, a feeling that they are not living in alignment with their core values. This sense of frustration and inner conflict is often the result of the person clinging to an outdated version of themselves, one shaped by external influences rather than their authentic desires. At some point, however, the individual may undergo a moment of crisis, a death of the old self. This crisis may manifest as a deep realization that they have been living a life that is not truly their own, and that in order to live authentically, they must let go of the habits, beliefs, and expectations that have been holding them back. This is a painful process, as it involves confronting the fear of change and the uncertainty of what lies ahead. But it is also an empowering process, as it offers the individual the opportunity to create a new identity, one that is more aligned with their true self. By embracing this metaphorical death, the individual can begin the process of rebirth, a rebirth that allows them to live more freely, assertively, and authentically. Nietzsche's philosophy also suggests that self-assertion requires a willingness to face the discomfort and challenges that come with breaking free from societal norms. It is easy to conform to the expectations of others, to follow the path that has been laid out for us by culture, religion, or family. But true self-assertion requires the courage to reject these external pressures and to create our own path. Nietzsche believed that individuals who are willing to face the challenges of self-creation, who are willing to confront the discomfort of letting go of the past and embracing the unknown, are the ones who will experience the fullest expression of freedom and power. An important aspect of self-assertion, according to Nietzsche, is the rejection of what he called slave morality. Slave morality is a set of values that glorifies weakness, meekness, and submission, often at the expense of individual power and creativity. Nietzsche argued that this morality, which is often rooted in religious and societal traditions, stifles human potential by encouraging individuals to deny their own desires and instincts. In contrast, Nietzsche advocates for master morality, a set of values that celebrates strength, creativity, and the will to power. The individual who practices master morality asserts their own will, creates their own values, and embraces the fullness of life, including the inevitable challenges and struggles that come with it. The concept of death as a necessary part of self-assertion also speaks to Nietzsche's broader critique of society's tendency to impose conformity and mediocrity on its members. Nietzsche believed that modern society, with its emphasis on equality, comfort, and conformity, often discourages individuals from expressing their true selves and reaching their highest potential. In Nietzsche's view, society's norms and values serve to suppress the individual's natural instincts and creativity, leading to a kind of spiritual death, a death of individuality, freedom, and authenticity. To overcome this, individuals must be willing to kill off the parts of themselves that are bound by societal expectations, and to assert their own will to power in order to live authentically. This process of self-assertion and the metaphorical death that accompanies it is not a one-time event but an ongoing challenge. Nietzsche believed that the individual must constantly strive to overcome themselves, to break free from the constraints of their past, and to continually create a new and more powerful version of themselves. This process of self-overcoming is not easy, and it often requires the individual to confront deep-seated fears, insecurities, and doubts. However, it is through this ongoing struggle that individuals can achieve true freedom and self-realization. In essence, death in Nietzsche's philosophy is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced as a necessary part of the journey toward self-assertion and personal growth. The death of the old self, the self that is bound by societal norms, cultural expectations, and the limitations of the past, paves the way for the emergence of a new, more authentic self. This new self is one that is free to create its own values, to assert its own will, and to live in accordance with its true nature. By embracing the metaphorical death of the old self, the individual can begin the process of self-assertion, creating a life that is truly their own. Nietzsche's ideas on death and self-assertion provide a powerful framework for understanding personal transformation and growth. His philosophy encourages individuals to confront the limitations of their past, to challenge the values that have been imposed upon them, and to embrace the freedom and power that comes with living authentically. The process of self-assertion requires the courage to face the discomfort of change, the willingness to confront the death of the old self, and the determination to create a new, empowered version of who we are. Through this process, Nietzsche shows us that death is not an end, but a beginning of a new, more authentic and powerful life. In Nietzsche's philosophy, the concept of overcoming oneself is one of the most profound and revolutionary ideas. It encapsulates the essence of personal growth, self-empowerment, and the constant striving to transcend one's limitations. To Nietzsche, this process is inextricably linked with the idea of death, not as a literal, physical ending, but as a metaphorical death, the death of the old self, the death of outdated values, and the death of social norms that inhibit personal development. For Nietzsche, death is not a finality, it is a necessary part of the ongoing journey of self-overcoming, a process that is central to living authentically and achieving personal greatness. The concept of overcoming oneself in Nietzsche's philosophy is rooted in his belief that life is a dynamic, ever-changing process. Nietzsche viewed life not as a static state, but as a constant flux, where individuals must continuously evolve and adapt to reach their fullest potential. This evolution is not a passive process, it requires active engagement, courage, and a willingness to face the discomfort of change. The individual must be willing to confront and transcend their old selves, their fears, insecurities, and limiting beliefs if they are to become who they truly are. For Nietzsche, overcoming oneself is not just about existing or surviving, it is about creating a life of purpose, meaning, and personal power. It is the process of actively shaping one's identity, values, and direction in life, free from the constraints of societal expectations or inherited norms. This idea of self-overcoming is directly connected to Nietzsche's concept of death. To overcome oneself, Nietzsche argues, one must be willing to let go of the old self, the self that is bound by external influences, and embrace a new, more empowered version of oneself. This death of the old self is a prerequisite for personal growth and transformation. The death of the old self, in Nietzsche's view, is not a mere intellectual exercise, nor is it a voluntary renunciation of the past. It is a radical, existential process that requires a willingness to confront the discomfort and disorientation that comes with letting go of familiar values, beliefs, and identities. This death is symbolic, representing the dissolution of the limitations that society, culture, or even the individual's own fears have placed upon them. To truly overcome oneself, one must shed these external and internal barriers, allowing the individual to embrace a new, more powerful version of themselves. This process of self-overcoming is not an isolated, individualistic endeavor. For Nietzsche, it is inherently tied to the world around us and the way we interact with others. As we transcend our old selves, we also begin to reshape the world in our image, creating a new set of values and a new perspective on life. In this sense, overcoming oneself is both a deeply personal journey and a larger societal project. Nietzsche believed that individuals who embrace this process of self-overcoming not only transform their own lives but contribute to the transformation of society as well. By rejecting conventional values and creating new ones, these individuals create a new world, one that is not limited by the old constraints but is open to greater freedom, creativity, and possibility. Nietzsche's view of overcoming oneself as a form of death and rebirth can be illustrated through a concrete example. Imagine an individual who has spent years living a life dictated by external expectations, pursuing a career that they were told would bring them success, adhering to social norms that dictate how they should behave, and suppressing their true desires in order to conform to the standards set by others. Over time, this individual may begin to feel a growing sense of dissatisfaction and disconnect from their true self. They may realize that the life they are living is not the life they truly want. At this point, they are faced with a choice: to continue living inauthentically, clinging to the old self and its limitations, or to confront the discomfort of change and undergo a process of self-overcoming. In Nietzsche's terms, this individual must die to the old self, the part of them that has been shaped by societal expectations and external pressures, and be reborn into a new self, one that is free to create its own values and live authentically. This process may be painful and uncertain, but it is essential for personal growth. The individual must be willing to let go of the safety and predictability of the past in order to embrace a new, more authentic way of being. By doing so, they embark on the path of self-overcoming and begin the process of creating a life that is truly their own. Nietzsche's idea of self-overcoming also extends beyond the individual level and encompasses the creation of new values. In his critique of traditional morality, Nietzsche argued that the values promoted by religion and society often stifle human potential and creativity. These values, such as meekness, self-sacrifice, and obedience, limit the individual's ability to assert their own will and live according to their true desires. In order to fully overcome oneself, Nietzsche believed that individuals must reject these life-denying values and create a new set of values that affirm life and personal power. The death of old values and beliefs is a necessary part of this process of self-overcoming. To create new values, individuals must first shed the old ones that no longer serve them. This process involves a deep confrontation with one's own past, examining the beliefs, attitudes, and assumptions that have shaped one's life, and deciding which ones to keep and which ones to discard. The individual must then actively create new values that are more aligned with their authentic self and their true desires. This creation of new values is not a passive process but an act of self-assertion. It is a rejection of external authority and a declaration of one's autonomy and power. Nietzsche's idea of self-overcoming is closely tied to his concept of the Übermensch Overman. The Übermensch is the ideal individual who has transcended the limitations of traditional morality and societal norms. This individual is constantly in the process of self-overcoming, rejecting the values of the past and creating new ones that affirm life and personal power. The Übermensch is not a static figure but a constantly evolving one, always striving to become more, to overcome their limitations, and to create new possibilities for themselves. Nietzsche's Übermensch is a model of self-assertion, a person who has fully embraced their own will to power and is actively creating their own life. This idea of self-overcoming and the death of the old self is also central to Nietzsche's concept of Amor Fati, the love of one's fate. Nietzsche believed that individuals should not only accept their fate but embrace it as an essential part of the process of self-overcoming. The idea of Amor Fati involves accepting all aspects of life, the good, the bad, and the painful, as necessary steps in the journey of self-creation. By embracing one's fate, including the death of the old self, the individual can transcend the limitations of the past and fully engage in the process of self-overcoming. This acceptance of fate is not a resignation to passivity but an active affirmation of life, including its challenges and difficulties. To overcome oneself, according to Nietzsche, is to live with purpose and intention, to reject the values and beliefs that have been imposed upon us, and to actively create a life that is true to our authentic self. It requires the courage to face the discomfort and uncertainty of change and the strength to confront the death of the old self. Through this process of self-overcoming, individuals can create a life that is not limited by external expectations but is fully aligned with their deepest desires and values. It is a process of continuous growth and transformation, where the individual constantly strives to transcend their former self and create a new, more empowered version of who they are. In conclusion, Nietzsche's concept of death and self-overcoming offers a powerful framework for personal growth and self-empowerment. Death, in Nietzsche's philosophy, is not an end but a transformation, a necessary step in the ongoing process of self-creation and self-assertion. The death of the old self allows the individual to transcend their limitations, reject outdated values, and create a new life that is true to their authentic self. This process of self-overcoming is not easy, but it is essential for living a meaningful and empowered life. By embracing the death of the old self and the continuous process of self-transformation, individuals can create a life that is fully their own, one that is rooted in freedom, power, and authenticity. In Nietzsche's philosophy, death is not merely an inevitable end but a crucial element in the affirmation of life itself. Rather than encouraging fear or avoidance of death, Nietzsche views death as an opportunity, a moment to embrace the fullness of existence and to live more authentically. Through the lens of Nietzsche's ideas, death is not something to be feared but something to be welcomed as a powerful force that can bring deeper meaning and purpose to life. To Nietzsche, the act of affirming life involves confronting and accepting death, not avoiding it, and in doing so, finding strength, freedom, and vitality. One of the most profound ideas in Nietzsche's philosophy is the notion that death, and particularly the acceptance of death, can lead to a greater affirmation of life. This perspective is radical in that it suggests that only by acknowledging the finite nature of existence can we truly live freely and meaningfully. Nietzsche does not deny the reality of death, nor does he seek to diminish its seriousness. Rather, he proposes that we must confront it head-on, embracing the inevitability of our mortality as a means of living more fully. This confrontation with death serves as a reminder that life is precious and that every moment should be lived with purpose and intention. For Nietzsche, the affirmation of life is not just about existing or surviving, it's about actively creating meaning in one's life. It's about living passionately and with conviction, despite or perhaps because of the reality that life is finite. By accepting death, Nietzsche suggests, we are freed from the fear that holds us back from living authentically. Rather than being constrained by the fear of an inevitable end, we are liberated to create a life that reflects our true desires and values. This is the essence of what Nietzsche means by the affirmation of life: to live boldly, to reject mediocrity, and to constantly strive to create a life that is uniquely one's own. The idea of affirming life through death can be better understood by examining Nietzsche's concept of Amor Fati, or the love of one's fate. Nietzsche argues that individuals should not merely accept their fate, including their eventual death, but actively embrace it. This means loving every aspect of one's life: the successes, the failures, the joys, and the struggles as part of the inevitable journey that leads to self-actualization. Death, in this sense, is not something that separates us from life, rather, it is an integral part of life itself. By affirming death, we also affirm life, accepting that every moment, every breath we take is precious and full of potential. One of the key aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy is the idea that we must transcend the old, life-denying values that are imposed upon us by society, culture, and religion. Nietzsche critiques traditional moral systems, particularly those found in Christianity, which he believes suppress life's vitality and creativity. According to Nietzsche, these traditional values encourage resignation and passivity, teaching people to reject life's challenges and to focus on an afterlife rather than fully engaging with the present moment. In contrast, Nietzsche argues that the true affirmation of life comes from rejecting these external moral systems and creating new values that are life-affirming. Death, in Nietzsche's view, becomes the vehicle through which we can reject these old values and embrace a new, more authentic way of being. The death of the old self, the self that is bound by conventional morality and societal expectations, makes way for the creation of a new self, one that is free to assert its own will and create its own values. In this way, death serves as both an end and a beginning. It marks the end of outdated beliefs and the beginning of a new life that is full of potential and possibility. The affirmation of life through death can also be seen in Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence. Nietzsche famously posed the question, what if a demon were to say to you that this life, as you now live it and have lived it, You will have to live once more and innumerable times more? This thought experiment challenges individuals to live in such a way that they would be willing to relive their lives over and over again. If we are able to affirm every moment of our existence, including the suffering and the death that is inevitably part of it, then we have truly embraced life in its fullest form. Eternal recurrence asks us to consider whether we can love our fate so completely that we would be willing to repeat it eternally. It is through the acceptance of death and the willingness to live in accordance with the reality of our mortality that we can fully affirm our existence. This idea of affirming life through death is also closely related to Nietzsche's vision of the Übermensch, the Overman, or Superman. The Übermensch is the ideal individual who has transcended the limitations of conventional morality and societal norms. This person lives authentically and fully, creating their own values and shaping their own destiny. To become the Übermensch, one must confront and accept death as part of the process of self-creation. The Übermensch is not someone who avoids life's difficulties, but someone who embraces them and uses them as fuel for personal growth and empowerment. Death, in this sense, is not an obstacle to be feared, but a necessary part of the journey towards self-realization and the affirmation of life. Nietzsche's philosophy also calls for a rejection of what he terms slave morality, the system of values that encourages weakness, submission, and self-sacrifice. Slave morality, according to Nietzsche, places too much emphasis on humility, meekness, and the renunciation of life's pleasures. It is a life-denying philosophy that encourages individuals to suppress their natural instincts and desires in favor of a moral code that prioritizes the needs of others over the individual. Nietzsche believed that this kind of morality stifles creativity and vitality and prevents people from fully embracing life. In contrast, Nietzsche's master morality celebrates strength, creativity, and the assertion of one's own will. To affirm life, Nietzsche argues, individuals must reject slave morality and embrace a life that is rich with passion, vitality, and personal power. The affirmation of life through death is not just a personal matter, it is a social and cultural one as well. Nietzsche's critique of society revolves around the idea that modern civilization, with its emphasis on comfort, security, and conformity, discourages individuals from living authentically. In a world where everyone is encouraged to conform to the same standards of success and happiness, true individuality and self-expression are often suppressed. Nietzsche saw this as a form of spiritual death, a death of creativity, vitality, and freedom. In contrast, he called for a reawakening, a rebirth of the individual who is willing to embrace life in its entirety, including its challenges and its inevitable end. By affirming life through death, the individual can transcend the limitations of society and live a life that is truly their own. One powerful example of the affirmation of life through death can be seen in the story of someone who has gone through significant personal hardship or loss. Rather than succumbing to despair or resignation, this individual may choose to embrace their suffering as part of their personal journey. They may choose to view their experiences as opportunities for growth and transformation, using the pain and challenges of life as a means of developing greater strength, wisdom, and resilience. In doing so, they embody the very essence of Nietzsche's affirmation of life, the ability to confront death, suffering, and difficulty head-on and use them as a means to create a more authentic, powerful life. In a more contemporary context, the affirmation of life through death can be seen in individuals who reject societal expectations and create their own path in life. This might include artists who refuse to conform to commercial success in favor of artistic integrity, entrepreneurs who take risks to create innovative new businesses, or individuals who live unconventional lives in order to pursue personal fulfillment. These individuals, by affirming their own values and rejecting the constraints of societal norms, embrace life in a way that is true to themselves, regardless of the challenges or sacrifices that may come their way. In conclusion, Nietzsche's philosophy of affirming life through death offers a powerful vision of personal freedom, self-expression, and growth. By accepting the reality of our mortality and confronting the limitations that society, culture, and religion place upon us, we are able to live more fully, more authentically, and with greater purpose. Death, in Nietzsche's thought, is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced as part of the continuous process of self-creation. Through the acceptance of death and the affirmation of life, we can transcend our old selves, create new values, and live a life that is truly our own. This is the essence of Nietzsche's philosophy: to live boldly, to embrace all that life offers, including its struggles and its inevitable end, and to create a life that reflects our deepest desires and values. In Nietzsche's philosophy, death serves as an essential and transformative concept, not merely as the end of life, but as a necessary process for self-rebirth. This radical view challenges conventional understandings of death as an ultimate, irreversible conclusion. For Nietzsche, death represents more than just the cessation of biological functions. It is the death of the old self, of outdated values, and of limiting beliefs that constrain human potential. The concept of death, in this sense, becomes not a termination, but an opportunity for profound transformation, a chance to transcend former selves and emerge as more empowered, authentic versions of oneself. Nietzsche's vision of self-rebirth through death is one that encourages us to shed the layers of identity shaped by societal expectations and external pressures, and to embrace a life that is truly ours, free from external validation. The idea that death is integral to self-rebirth lies at the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy. Nietzsche posited that, in order to grow and evolve, individuals must experience a metaphorical death and existential shedding of the old, the weak, and the untrue. This death is not about literal death, but rather the dissolution of the ego, of previous self-conceptions, and of external value systems that hinder personal growth. Nietzsche viewed this process of self-overcoming as the key to becoming an authentic, empowered individual. Death, in this context, symbolizes freedom, a liberation from the past, from societal pressures, and from the conventions that shape our identities. In order to be reborn, we must be willing to let go of the comfort and familiarity of our old selves. Embracing change is a necessary part of personal evolution. For Nietzsche, the process of self-rebirth is not simply about returning to some previous state of innocence or purity, but about radically transforming and reimagining oneself. It is about rejecting the parts of our identity that are shaped by others, whether through societal conditioning, cultural norms, or familial expectations, and creating new values that reflect our authentic desires and instincts. Death, in this sense, is a form of liberation, a breaking away from the constraints that have been imposed upon us by others. By letting go of these external influences, we can begin the process of self-creation, wherein we shape our lives in alignment with our true essence. Nietzsche's philosophy is grounded in the belief that life is a continuous process of becoming. For Nietzsche, life is not static, it is a dynamic force that requires us to constantly evolve, grow, and transcend the limitations of our past. This evolution involves confronting and overcoming the parts of ourselves that are tied to old beliefs, outdated value systems, and societal norms. These old selves are not only limiting, but they often keep us from realizing our full potential. By allowing the death of these parts of ourselves, we open the door to new possibilities and new identities. This is the process of self-rebirth, becoming who we truly are, free from the constraints of the past. The importance of death in this process can be further understood through the example of someone who has spent years living according to the expectations of others. This person may have followed a prescribed path, pursuing a career, relationships, and goals that were imposed upon them by family, society, or culture. Over time, however, this individual may begin to feel a sense of dissatisfaction or unease. They may sense that the life they are living is not their own, that they have been shaped by external forces rather than their own desires. At this moment, the individual is faced with a choice: either to continue living a life that is dictated by others, or to confront the death of their old self, to reject the life that has been prescribed for them, and to begin the process of self-rebirth. In order to embrace this process, the individual must be willing to face the discomfort of change. They must let go of the old, familiar parts of themselves, the self-image that has been constructed based on the expectations of others. This is not an easy process. It often involves confronting deep-seated fears, doubts, and insecurities, but it is through this process of self-overcoming that true growth and transformation occur. By accepting the death of the old self, the individual creates space for the emergence of a new self, one that is more authentic, more empowered, and more aligned with their true values and desires. Nietzsche's philosophy also speaks to the broader idea that, In order to achieve self-rebirth, we must be willing to accept the uncomfortable and challenging aspects of life. Death, in this sense, becomes a metaphor for all the struggles and challenges that life presents. It is through these challenges that we are forced to confront our weaknesses, face our fears, and ultimately grow. Nietzsche believed that individuals who shy away from life's difficulties, who seek comfort and security at the expense of growth, are stifling their own potential. True self-rebirth, in Nietzsche's view, requires a willingness to embrace life's challenges, to face the darkness of existence, and to emerge stronger and more capable. In Nietzsche's philosophy, the death of the old self is not just an internal process, it also involves a rejection of the external structures that have shaped our lives. This includes the societal values, religious beliefs, and moral codes that have been handed down to us by culture and tradition. Nietzsche believed that traditional morality, particularly Christian morality, has suppressed human potential by promoting values like meekness, self-sacrifice, and obedience. These values, according to Nietzsche, discourage individuals from asserting their own will and living authentically. In order to experience true self-rebirth, Nietzsche argued, we must reject these life-denying values and create new ones that reflect our inherent will to power. The process of death and self-rebirth also plays a crucial role in Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, Overman, or Superman. The Übermensch represents the ideal individual who has transcended the limitations of conventional morality and societal norms. This figure has undergone a continuous process of self-overcoming, rejecting the values of the past and creating new ones that affirm life and personal power. The Übermensch is not bound by the constraints of tradition or religion, but instead lives according to their own values and instincts. To become the Übermensch, one must continually undergo the death of the old self, constantly shedding outdated beliefs, identities, and societal expectations, and creating a new self that is more powerful, more authentic, and more aligned with one's true desires. Nietzsche's idea of self-rebirth through death also ties into his broader view of life as a cycle of constant transformation. Life, for Nietzsche, is not a fixed or predetermined path, but a dynamic force that requires individuals to continuously evolve and reinvent themselves. This constant process of self-overcoming is essential to achieving personal freedom and empowerment. By embracing the death of the old self, individuals can break free from the constraints of their past, create new values, and live a life that is true to their authentic nature. This concept of self-rebirth through the death of the old self can be applied to various aspects of life, including personal growth, career choices, and relationships. For example, someone who has spent years in a job they dislike, conforming to the expectations of others, may experience a deep sense of dissatisfaction. They may realize that they have been living according to the expectations of society or their family, rather than following their own desires and passions. In order to break free from this cycle, the individual must be willing to let go of their old self, the person who has been defined by external pressures, and embrace a new identity, one that is true to their own values and aspirations. This process may involve taking risks, stepping into the unknown, and facing the discomfort of change. However, it is through this death of the old self that the individual can experience a true rebirth, a new life that is more aligned with their true purpose and desires. Nietzsche's view of death as a necessary part of self-rebirth also challenges traditional notions of identity and selfhood. In conventional thinking, identity is often seen as something fixed and static, something that remains unchanged throughout life. However, Nietzsche's philosophy suggests that identity is fluid, dynamic, and constantly evolving. The self is not a stable entity, but a process of continual self-creation. In order to fully realize our potential, we must be willing to let go of the self-concept that no longer serves us and embrace a new identity, one that reflects our true nature and desires. The concept of death and self-rebirth, then, is not merely a philosophical abstraction, but a practical approach to living a more authentic and empowered life. By accepting the death of the old self, individuals can break free from the limitations of their past and create a life that is truly their own. This process of self-overcoming is not easy, but it is essential to achieving personal growth, empowerment, and fulfillment. Nietzsche's philosophy teaches us that death is not to be feared, but to be embraced as a necessary part of the ongoing process of becoming who we truly are. Ultimately, Nietzsche's view of death and self-rebirth provides a powerful framework for personal transformation. It challenges us to confront the parts of ourselves that are holding us back, to shed the identities and values that are no longer serving us, and to embrace a new, more authentic version of ourselves. By accepting the death of the old self and embracing the potential for self-creation, we can live a life that is not defined by external pressures, but by our own will and desires. This process of self-overcoming and rebirth is the key to living a life that is full of meaning, purpose, and personal power. Nietzsche's view of death challenges traditional understandings by suggesting that it is not the ultimate conclusion, but rather a necessary and transformative part of the human experience. In his philosophy, death is not to be feared or avoided, but embraced as a vital component of personal growth and self-overcoming. For Nietzsche, death is not the end of life but a symbolic death of old values, outdated beliefs, and the limitations that society imposes upon the individual. By confronting and accepting this death, we open the door to rebirth and opportunity to create new values, transcend our past limitations, and live a life that is authentic and true to our own will. The idea of self-rebirth, or becoming who we truly are, is central to Nietzsche's philosophy. He argues that in order to fully experience life's potential, individuals must go through a process of self-transformation and ongoing journey of self-overcoming, where we challenge our old selves and embrace new possibilities. This is where the concept of death comes into play. Death, in this context, represents the necessary end of old identities and the emergence of something new and more powerful. It is through the death of the old, constrained self that the individual can give birth to a new, more authentic version of themselves. It is through this metaphorical death and the subsequent rebirth that people can live in alignment with their true desires, free from societal expectations and inherited values. Nietzsche's philosophy is rooted in the belief that life is a constant process of becoming, not a static existence but an evolving force that demands continuous growth and adaptation. To become who we truly are, we must be willing to challenge and dismantle the limits that are imposed on us by society, culture, and even our own past selves. The death of the old self is essential for personal growth and self-empowerment. By shedding outdated beliefs and the restrictions that limit our freedom, we make room for the creation of a new self, one that is strong, autonomous, and true to its own will. Nietzsche's message is clear. We should not view death as something to fear or resist but as an essential force in our personal evolution. Life is full of challenges, struggles, and moments of crisis, all of which offer us the opportunity to confront our own limitations and rise above them. By embracing these challenges and confronting the metaphorical death of the self, we can overcome fear, doubt, and insecurity. This process of self-assertion and self-creation allows us to break free from the constraints of the past and become the masters of our own destiny. Nietzsche encourages us to embrace the concept of death in our own lives not as a source of despair, but as a source of empowerment. Life is finite, and the acceptance of this finite nature is what gives our existence its urgency and significance. To truly live, we must confront the reality of death and use it as a catalyst for self-improvement. By acknowledging our mortality, we are reminded of the preciousness of each moment, and this realization can propel us to live more fully and with greater purpose. Through the death of the old self and the rebirth of the new, we find the freedom to live authentically and pursue our deepest desires without the fear of judgment or societal constraints. This view of death as part of the journey towards self-realization and personal freedom has profound implications for how we live our daily lives. Nietzsche's philosophy encourages us to examine the ways in which we are held back by outdated values, limiting beliefs, and external expectations. It challenges us to reflect on the aspects of our identity that have been shaped by societal norms and to question whether these aspects align with our true selves. Nietzsche's vision of self-overcoming invites us to embark on a journey of self-discovery, where we confront the parts of ourselves that no longer serve us and let them go. Only through this process of shedding the old and embracing the new can we experience true personal growth and empowerment. Nietzsche's ideas invite us to think deeply about the role of death in our own lives, not just as the physical end of our existence but as a metaphor for all the ways in which we must constantly renew and transform ourselves. In our personal lives, death can symbolize the end of old patterns, unhealthy habits, and outdated beliefs. It can represent the moment when we choose to let go of the past and create a new future for ourselves. Whether it is through ending a toxic relationship, leaving behind an unfulfilling career, or overcoming old fears and doubts, the process of death and rebirth is central to living a life that is true to ourselves. Nietzsche's philosophy also speaks to the importance of embracing suffering and hardship as integral parts of this process. He does not advocate for a life of avoidance or complacency, but rather for a life that engages with the challenges that come our way. Suffering, in Nietzsche's view, is not something to escape but something to be used as a tool for growth. Just as the phoenix must burn to rise from the ashes, so too must we face the struggles and difficulties of life in order to emerge stronger, more resilient, and more self-assured. In practical terms, this means that when faced with a difficult situation, we should not shy away from it but instead embrace it as an opportunity to test our strength and develop new capacities. By confronting our limitations and allowing ourselves to die to the parts of us that are weak or outdated, we can experience the kind of transformation that Nietzsche describes. This is not an easy path, but it is the path to true freedom, authenticity, and self-empowerment. Nietzsche's call to love our fate, or Amor Fati, the love of one's destiny, reinforces this idea of embracing all aspects of life, including its challenges and its end. To love our fate is to accept death as an inevitable part of the human experience and to live with the full awareness that every moment counts. When we love our fate, we are not merely accepting death but are affirming life in all its complexity. The challenges, the joys, the failures, and the successes all come together to form the rich tapestry of our existence. By accepting death as part of this process, we affirm life itself. By embracing death in this way, Nietzsche offers a radical new approach to living a full and meaningful life. It is a life that is not defined by external expectations or traditional moral values, but one that is shaped by the individual's own will to power. It is a life that is constantly evolving, constantly creating, and constantly overcoming. The death of the old self is not an end but a transition, a necessary step toward becoming who we truly are. Through this process of self-overcoming, we affirm life not just as it is but as it can be, through our own creative and empowered choices. Ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy encourages us to rethink our relationship with death and how it relates to our journey of self-realization. Death is not an end to be feared, but a beginning of a new, more authentic life. By embracing death and accepting its role in the process of self-rebirth, we free ourselves from the constraints of the past and create the conditions for a life that is true to our deepest desires. This is the true meaning of living authentically, a life where we assert our own will, transcend societal expectations, and create a future that is uniquely ours. In this way, Nietzsche's vision of death and self-rebirth is a call to action, a call to live fully, to embrace change, and to continually strive to overcome our limitations. It is a call to embrace death not as an enemy but as a vital part of the process of becoming who we are meant to be. Through this affirmation of life, we can live with purpose, meaning, and authenticity, creating a life that reflects our deepest values and aspirations. So, what can we take away from Nietzsche's philosophy on death and self-rebirth? It's clear that, for Nietzsche, death isn't something to fear or avoid. It's something to embrace as an essential part of the process of becoming who we truly are. By accepting the death of our old selves, the outdated beliefs, the societal expectations, the identities that no longer serve us, we create the space for transformation and growth. This is where true freedom lies, in the courage to confront death, to let go of the past, and to step boldly into a new version of ourselves. Nietzsche's ideas challenge us to rethink our relationship with life and death. Instead of fearing the inevitable end, we are invited to live more fully, to assert our own values, and to create lives that reflect our deepest desires. Death is not the end, it's the beginning of a new, more authentic life, where we are free to shape our own destiny and live with purpose. Now, I want to hear from you. How can you embrace death in your own life, not literally, but in the sense of shedding your old self, overcoming your limitations, and creating a new, more empowered version of who you are? How can you apply Nietzsche's radical ideas to break free from societal constraints and live a more authentic, powerful life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. If this video resonated with you, Make sure to hit that like button. Share it with someone who could use this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more philosophical insights. And remember, if you want to support the channel and help me keep making videos like this, you can donate using the super thanks button below. Every contribution makes a difference and helps me continue sharing these life-changing ideas with you. Thanks for watching, and remember, in order to truly live, we must be willing to embrace the death of our old selves and rise to something greater. See you in the next video, where we'll continue to explore the power of philosophy to transform our lives. Stay strong, stay authentic, and keep questioning everything.